Tell us about a scary situation in your life when you suddenly realized you needed to get out right now.
Let's go!
Story 1. I was walking with my sister in a local park. We got there around 3 in the afternoon and hung around until about 9:30 at night. Everything was fine until we saw 3 guys on the other side of the park wearing absolutely identical clothes. I noticed them immediately, but I didn't think much of it at first. We walked for another 2 minutes, and then I saw that one of them had stopped and was staring right at us. I immediately got a very creepy feeling. I told my sister, "We need to leave." She understood everything without asking questions, and we got out of there fast. Later that same night, there was a breaking news report about a stabbing in that exact park. The suspects were the 3 guys we had seen. Story 2. About 20 years ago, when I was a teenager, I was riding my bike home from a friend's house. We lost track of time and stayed up late, so I was heading back in the dark. I lived about a couple of kilometers away. I turned onto one of the roads leading to my house when I suddenly got a strange feeling. I looked back and saw headlights. A car stopped at the intersection and slowly turned onto my road. There were almost no houses there, no streetlights, just the middle of nowhere. As soon as they turned, I didn't hesitate. I bolted into the woods and hid far away from the roadside. The car slowed down, drove past slowly, and then moved on. I have no idea what they wanted, but I had absolutely no desire to find out. Story 3. A year ago, Hurricane Florence was hitting our state. We planned to ride it out at home, thinking we would just hang out, since our area wasn't expecting winds that were too strong. I mostly ignored the news warnings. But the night before the hurricane, I got an extremely anxious feeling, literally a pit in my stomach. I started begging my father to go to my sister's place, which was a couple of hours away from the coast. We even argued about it, but I eventually convinced him. We returned a week after the hurricane and saw a fallen tree on our house, which was also flooded. It turned out that a tornado had formed in the woods behind the house and brought the tree down right on the roof. Since then, I always trust my gut, no matter how stupid it seems. Story 4. When I was a kid, a guy came up to me on the street and started asking for directions. I started explaining the way, when suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a van pulling up with the side door open. I immediately ran as fast as I could and didn't even look back. Story 5. I was at a house party, and the host suddenly told all the guests to go down and continue the party in the basement. They were smiling, but they spoke with clear aggression. Most of my friends and I left immediately. But there was one acquaintance of ours who decided to stay. He ended up getting robbed. Story 6. A few years ago, my boyfriend owned a tire shop. One time, he went to a client's house without warning to get them to write a check, because they owed the company a large sum of money. When he left their house, he was a little shaken. He explained that there were a lot of the owner's brothers inside, which was unusual, and they were all acting very nervous. They wrote him the check and then quickly ushered him out. That day, my boyfriend was left with a strange, anxious feeling. 2 days later, the client and his brothers were arrested for a murder they had committed just the day before we arrived. Story 7. My friend and I decided to go camping in the woods. There were few campsites in that area, and they were all far apart. We were ready to spend the night there. The spot was set up and equipped with everything we needed. But we had to drive to the nearest town for food. When we were returning to our cozy little camp, we met a man on the road. We locked eyes, and I immediately felt uneasy. He looked at us with pure hatred, as if we were his enemies, even though we had never seen him in our lives. When we got back to the camp, we saw chaos. Our bags were scattered near the tent, clothes were thrown everywhere. We immediately noticed that 2 hunting knives were missing, plus some clothes were gone. The thought instantly popped into our heads that it was the guy we had bumped into. Because that trail didn't lead anywhere except to our spot. We jumped into the car and drove back to where we had seen him, but he was gone. We drove a little further and found a gathering spot where other hikers were hanging out. We got out, described the man, and asked if anyone had seen him. The crowd of people just stared at us in silence. That made it even creepier, and I told my friend, "We need to leave right now." Walking back to the car, we saw our stolen clothes behind a fence. We quickly grabbed the stuff, but there wasn't a single knife among them. Keeping in mind that the guy was still out there, he had the knives, and there was no one around to help, we nervously jumped into the car and drove as far away as possible. We would never have stayed in those woods for the night. This is the kind of common sense I scream at people to use every time I watch horror movies about camping. Story 8. It was about 2 in the morning. We were sleeping in an apartment on the top floor when we suddenly woke up to the fire alarm going off. It was late, we didn't want to get up, and we almost thought it was a false alarm. And then I suddenly saw smoke seeping in from under the front door. It was terrifying to imagine what was happening on the other side. We ran down the stairs as fast as we could, choking on the smoke, barely able to see where we were going. Lesson learned forever. Now I will take fire alarms much more seriously. Story 9. I was drinking at a bar with some buddies. Two guys walked by, and I accidentally made eye contact with them. One of them pulled out a gun, pointed it at me, and nodded toward the door. He didn't have to tell me twice. Story 10. In my freshman year of college, I went to a party. There were some sketchy guys there. The evening was getting very tense, although there were no fights or anything like that yet. But as night fell, it became clear to me that something was about to go down. I warned my friend that it was time to bail. Less than 5 minutes after we left, one guy got stabbed, and the guy who stabbed him got shot. Story 11. My car got stolen the same night we moved into a new house in a very nice neighborhood. Neighbors warned us that things had been restless lately, and robberies were happening periodically. They told us how a woman was recently robbed when she opened the door to a knock in the middle of the night. Unknown attackers assaulted her, robbed her, and almost killed her. Anyway, after the theft, we immediately called the police. A couple of days later, in the middle of the night, I heard a knock on the door. Open up, police. Keeping the story of that poor woman in mind, I got suspicious and didn't answer. I took the kids and led them to a room where we could get out onto the roof through a window. Then I called 911 and said that two men were knocking on our door, claiming to be police. The dispatcher told me that there were no patrols in the area at that moment. They sent a squad immediately. It turned out it was the same guys who stole the car, and they suddenly decided to return it. By the way, they gave me the car back. They were driving it. Nice of them. I hope they filled up the tank. Story 12. I was on vacation walking through a nature reserve. It was shaped like a crater with a path on the very edge that you could take almost all the way down. I had a strong gut feeling, nope, not going down there. Later that same day, I learned about a woman who died there from being hit by something heavy when kids were throwing rocks and branches from the slope for fun. Story 13. I was babysitting a child when suddenly I heard someone scraping something metal against the glass. I immediately hid the kids in the closet and called the police. A little longer, and we would have been robbed, or worse. Story 14. I was walking along a long road. There were no houses around, only a cemetery. A van with two guys pulled up to me. They asked if I wanted a ride. This was in the late 90s when hitchhiking didn't seem like a death wish yet. But I said, no thanks, I'm almost there. They wouldn't leave me alone, driving behind me with the windows down, trying to persuade me, come on, just hop in. At one point, they just stopped and started getting out of the van. I was a teenager, and they were in their 20s. I realized I needed to run. I ran for about a kilometer until I reached the nearest alley and hid near the first building. I waited for 15 minutes, and only then, making sure they had backed off, did I go home. Story 15. I went on a second date with a guy. At some point, he wanted to stop by his place to grab something and invited me inside. He was very hot, but I don't know why, I felt some discomfort around him. We went inside, and it was downright creepy. The guy had money, the house was luxurious, but perfectly sterile. Nothing on the walls, all the shelves were empty. No books, no CDs, nothing personal at all. I asked how long he had lived there, and he answered, 5 years. He went into the kitchen and yelled for me to go into his bedroom and get the keys from the top drawer of the dresser. A terrible chill went down my spine. I immediately moved closer to the front door. I absolutely did not want to let him get between me and the exit. He asked me to go into the room again. I laughed and said, no, dude, I'm so hungry, let's go. He asked again, clearly irritated this time. And then I started playing dumb, whining that I was hungry and asking why the hell he was taking so long. He was furious, but he came out. I walked down the sidewalk to the car, and he had to follow me. We drove to my house in total silence. When he stopped, he leaned in to kiss me goodbye. He bit my lip so hard that it started bleeding, and then he shoved his hand under my shirt and grabbed my breast painfully. Luckily, I pushed him away, fell out of the car, and ran home to the sound of his evil laughter. The result, bruises on my chest and a torn lip. I was scared that he knew where I lived. I am sure I saved myself from a serial killer. It was just like the movie American Psycho. Story 16. Once while hiking, I saw a bear cub in the woods. I slowly turned around and walked away from it as fast as I could. You know, I didn't really want to get eaten. I had to drag my friend by the scruff of his neck because he didn't understand why we were suddenly turning around and stomping back. Actually, the bear cub wouldn't have eaten you. But its mother definitely would have killed you. The most dangerous thing you can meet in the woods is a lonely bear cub. Story 17. I remember once my grandma and I were driving down from the mountains and saw a bear cub that ran out and stopped on the road. It just stared at us and waited. Grandma slammed on the brakes, and we stopped. After maybe 5 minutes, the cub finally moved on, but Grandma sat motionless. I asked, "What are we waiting for? Why aren't we moving?" She pointed to the side window. "That's why." I looked and saw a huge mother bear slowly walking after her baby. Oh my god, it was terrifying, but at least we were in a car, and if anything happened, we could have driven away fast. Thanks for watching. Comment below with your own scary situations when you knew it was time to get out. Also, check out the video about whether you have incel friends and why they think girls won't sleep with them. See you later!